Parenting podcasts can be a bit earnest. Parenting Out Loud is not that podcast.
This person who I may not agree with politically is trying to talk about integrating children, not just into his professional life, but into public life.
I have referred to myself as one and done. That article did make me rethink the term.
It took about 11 seconds for this to go viral.
Oh God, is this the ejaculate one? That is deranged and I love it.
Parenting changes the way you see everything. Parenting Out Loud takes the big conversations of the moment and puts them through that filter.
Because if parents are thinking about it, we're talking about it.
Parenting Out Loud. Listen weekly wherever you get your podcasts.
So, Patty, we haven't done this for ages, but I wanted to start by talking about a DM that we got from a listener.
Nice.
Yep. I'm going to read it out. I would just like to reach out and thank you so much for your podcast. I started listening to you guys throughout my entire pregnancy to educate and prepare myself as a first-time mum. I'm so glad I did because I ended up having a traumatic birth, including an induction, an incredibly fast labour, less than 1.5 hours, the baby's heart rate dropping to 60 beats per minute, an episiotomy, forceps, shoulder dystocia, 3B tear and hemorrhaging not only during labour but also 2 weeks postpartum.
Whoa.
The knowledge I learnt from your podcast allowed me to understand what was happening during such a fast-paced, scary moment of my life where decisions had to be made quickly. It allowed me to focus on the situation and remain as calm as I could in a time where I easily could have spiralled out of control. Bubs and I are now 3 months postpartum and can happily report neither of us have had any long-term problems as a result of the birth and are now enjoying this new phase of my life. Thank you. And a big heart. That is just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks for getting in touch.
I know. And I'm sorry that was just a traumatic birth that had pretty much everything. It was one with the lot. I just wanted to unpack one thing, and that is 3B tear.
Yeah.
Yep. And hemorrhaging not only during labour but also 2 weeks postpartum.
Yeah, so it just went on and on, didn't it, these complications? And it's hard to know exactly, what the details are behind those things. But there's certainly things that we discuss in our podcast and in our program, with the idea being that these are hopefully not going to happen to you. But if they do, knowledge about those things and some awareness of those things is surely going to be beneficial.
Yeah. So I really wanted to bring this to everybody's attention because, these are some things that can happen in birth. So the more knowledge you have, I think it has an impact on how calm you can be if you actually know what's going to be coming and how you can deal with it and what decisions to make.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much for giving us this DM.
Welcome to The Kick, your expert-led podcast helping you explore and learn everything about getting pregnant, pregnancy, birth and becoming a parent.
On the podcast and our online pregnancy program, Grow My Baby, we share my experience of helping more than 4,000 babies to be born.
And our experience of running a women's health clinic and parenting 4 boys.
We're here to help everyone to feel empowered in pregnancy and birth with real-life practical information.
Hi everyone. Well, before we start this episode, we've got a little update, a 2025 update. And actually we were prompted to do this by somebody who left a comment on Spotify. So this is a really great new feature that Spotify has. And if you've got any comments on any of our episodes, I read them all and then we bring them back and we have made edits to different podcast episodes. We've added bits, we've suggested to do different topics. So it's a really great way to have some feedback loop happening. So this came from anonymous, but she said, "Hey team, wondering if you could provide an edit to this episode advising the public that the screening is now covered under Medicare. I think the cost would be a huge barrier for many people and I would hate for people to listen to this outdated information and think they can't afford it. Thanks." Well, we would too. So here we go. But before we go on to Pat, I did want to say about how this all began. And it began in 2017. Mackenzie Casella was born to parents Rachel and Jonathan. At 10 weeks old, she was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy with no family history of genetic disease. The parents were not aware that they were carriers. Mackenzie died at 7 months and 11 days, and Rachel and Jonathan launched a campaign calling for reproductive genetic carrier screening to be publicly funded. In 2018, the Australian government announced $500 million towards genomics research and a $20 million study of reproductive genetic carrier screening, calling it Mackenzie's Mission. Amazing work by Rachel and Jonathan, which has actually ended up in November 2023, that the 3-panel carrier screen was made 100% bulk billed for anyone with Medicare in Australia. And the other thing I want to make people aware of is a quick kick that we released, and it's episode 162, and it's talking about the expanded panel screening, which is available now. So have a listen to what Dr. Pat talks about, knowing that the 3-gene carrier screening is now 100% bulk billed, and have a listen to the quick kick episode 162.
Struggling with the anxiety that comes with adulting?
Or maybe you've suddenly become the parent to your parents.
Wondering if you might have ADHD, but unsure if or how to get a diagnosis?
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Anastasia Horonis.
And I'm Ashani Dante. We're your hosts of But Are You Happy?
Bringing you all the self-development and mental health information you actually need.
New episodes drop every Saturday morning.
Just in time for your hot girl walk.
So tune in to But Are You Happy? The podcast where overthinking finally gets the spotlight it deserves. Made in partnership with Medibank.
If you're trying to get pregnant, or you are pregnant, and you feel a little bit overwhelmed by all you need to know, then this is the right podcast for you. Welcome to the show. I'm Bridget Maloney.
And I'm obstetrician Dr. Patrick Maloney. And this is The Kick, your expert-led podcast that delivers the essentials of growing a baby. Welcome to episode 3. This is Dr. Pat, and I'm flying solo today. Today's discussion is what I wish every woman knew before becoming pregnant. Most women in the pre-pregnancy phase know to take folate supplements, easy tick. They know that quitting smoking is best, easy tick. Even stopping that glass of wine at the end of the day is on the radar. Tick that one off. But what a lot of people don't know is that we now have the ability to look very closely at our genes. And these are genes that are incredibly common in our population. And 3 genes in particular for conditions known as cystic fibrosis or CF, spinal muscular atrophy, SMA, and Fragile X syndrome, FXS. And we'll get into what those are in just a moment. So these are recessive genetic disorders that we can be carriers of without having the disease ourselves. And a carrier is somebody who has some genes for that disease but does not have that disease but can pass it on to children. So what are your chances that you're a carrier of these genes? Well, it's actually pretty high. 1 in 25 people carry the gene for cystic fibrosis and up to 1 in 20 in Tasmania. And that's a lot more than a lot of people think. 1 in 50 people are carriers for spinal muscular atrophy, but the number of people who carry the Fragile X syndrome gene is not really known. These are pretty important genetic diseases which many people are completely unaware that they carry in their genes. In fact, a study in Genetics in Medicine medical journal found a massive 88% of couples are unaware that they're carriers for these conditions. And when 2 carriers have a baby together, their baby can get the full disease. I've seen firsthand the turmoil newly pregnant couples can go through if they find out that their much hoped for child has one of these diseases. It's hard. There are really tough decisions to make. It has long-lasting impacts on relationships and it can be heartbreaking. So let's get on with a few facts. Cystic fibrosis, or CF, is a severe condition affecting mainly breathing and digestion. People with cystic fibrosis need constant medical attention. They have a decreased lifespan to about their 30s. And about 1 in 2,500 babies born in Australia each year has cystic fibrosis. Fragile X syndrome is the most common form of inherited intellectual disability. And it affects about 1 in 3,600 males and about 1 in 6,000 females. and the children with Fragile X syndrome have varying degrees of behavioural and physical disabilities. And spinal muscular atrophy is really a terrible condition. It's a severe disease affecting muscles, and it's rare, only about 1 in 6 to 10,000 births, and it gives something that is sometimes called floppy baby syndrome. There are a few different types of spinal muscular atrophy, but basically babies with that diagnosis usually have a severe type and die before they're 2 years old. So, it all just got a bit heavy. This is serious stuff. So let's get back to making a baby. If your ducks are in a row and you've worked out when you're ovulating and you've prepared your lifestyle changes, given up the smokes, and you're ready to go and you're in the baby-making mood, I want you to think about stopping what you're doing for a moment and having a bit of a think about being tested for these conditions. Now, I've got absolutely no affiliation with any company, like most doctors for that matter, but I want you to consider something called a prepare test, and that's a carrier test that can be done on the woman and, if necessary, the male partner, to find out in advance whether we're carriers for these conditions. So as a specialist obstetrician, I normally see women at about 10 weeks when they're already pregnant. And I can tell you that since carrier testing became available, I've seen a grand total of 1 couple that have had pre-pregnancy testing to see if they're carriers for this condition. That, you heard that right, that's one couple. On other occasions, I've seen couples in heartbreak where they find out after they're pregnant that they were both carriers for this condition and the baby is affected. It's not common, but it does happen, and I don't want it to happen to you. Carrier testing is existing technology. It's available to you right now, and I think that you deserve the opportunity to at least consider it before you conceive. So this is something that we want to get done before we start trying, and I recommend that everyone at least consider a prepare test. And it's pretty much a must for couples with a family history of the diseases that we've talked about, even if it's in distant relatives. So what do? We go to the GP and we talk about pre-testing for these conditions, and the commercially available test that I use is called Prepare, Prepair, and it's available through the VCGS, which is the Victorian Clinical Genetics Service. So I'm really keen on people going to their doctor anyway before they get pregnant, so that the doctor has a chance to talk to you about readiness for pregnancy, and we can do a cervical screening test, the new pap smear, check your immunity to rubella, get you on some folate, talk about possible chickenpox vaccination, assess an irregular cycle. The list goes on, and there's lots of good reasons to go to the doctor before you get pregnant. But prepare testing is one that I think doesn't always come up, and I'd like to see it come up more often.
On Mamma Mia's new women's health podcast, Well, you might learn a thing or two about your very own body. Like that polycystic ovarian syndrome has nothing to do with cysts, that burnout is real and treatable, that the G-spot is elusive for a very good reason, and where the sperm goes that doesn't fertilise the egg. We're talking about how to sleep better, how to make babies, and even how to check ourselves into rehab. No matter how unusual or embarrassing your health question is, Well is here for you. Join me, Claire Murphy, and my amazing co-host Dr. Mariam for Well, dropping every Thursday. Well, brought to you by Chemist Warehouse, wherever you get your podcasts.
So we're going to cover in a future podcast all the good reasons to go to the doctor in advance, and we'll give you a link to a checklist that you can print out before you go to the doctor to make sure that those key things get discussed. So a prepare test is done on blood or saliva, and you go to the GP and you talk about it, and he'll give you a slip, just an ordinary pathology slip, and then you get online at vcgs.org.au/tests/prepare, Prepair, and you buy the test online and then send in the saliva, or go to pathology, have blood drawn, and they send in the blood. Now, the bummer is it costs $385, which is a spicy meatball, I know, but I just think that's incomparable compared to the peace of mind that this can give you. So far, it's a user-pays system, unfortunately. You can shop around a bit. There are other providers of this test through some of the other big pathology providers. And I hope that in a consumer market, it'll drive the costs down. And, consider this a call out to the government to consider subsidising testing like this. It would be great if there was enough government funding to keep up with technology, and we knew that most couples planning an upcoming pregnancy were aware in advance of their carrier status for these important conditions. So it's the woman who should be tested first, because one of the conditions, Fragile X, can only be passed on by the mother. So it's much more sense to check the woman first. And then the male partner would be tested if the woman was found to be a carrier for any of the conditions, because to pass the disease on to a child, both parents need to be carriers. And if you're both carriers, then in discussion with your doctor and some clever people who are called genetic counsellors, we can work out the exact chance of you guys as a couple having a baby with one of these significant diseases. So what do we do if you're both found out to be carriers? Well, couples in this situation are advised to consider a process called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And this involves a couple having an IVF cycle, which tends to go very well because IVF goes very well if the couple aren't actually infertile. And the embryos that are created are tested for the diseases in question. And only embryos that don't have the disease are used to be put back into the woman and grow into a baby. That process largely eliminates the risk of having a child with the disease for which the parents are carriers. Now, it's important that this is not NIPS testing, this is not harmony testing, this has got nothing to do with Down syndrome screening. I'll write a blog about that next time. This is about pre-pregnancy screening for carrier status for those diseases. And if the testing's normal, fantastic, carry on, make that baby. So that's it for today, short and sweet. All of this will be in our show notes. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that now so that you know when our next episode hits. And if you've liked what you've heard, please tell a friend. We're on a mission to bring this essential pregnancy information to every woman. See you next time.
Hey, even though Dr. Pat is, a doctor, and we get lots of other doctors and other experts on our podcast, I just need to remind you that this podcast is for informational purposes only. We share lots of medical insights and experience, but everything we talk about is general in nature and may not apply to your specific situation. Please always consult with your own healthcare provider for your individual medical advice when you grow your baby.